There you are again with Diane Arbus, because there was more, I'd say, provocatively involving to say about these photos that she did, that she selected from her all her work over the years to make that box of 10, which in that plexiglass box that I thought is really a very interesting idea, that she supervised its construction so that it's a frame. You can hang it on the wall, and then it's also a container for all of those. So you can essentially have your own changing gallery. You can choose whichever one you want to look at a time and put it up and then move on to another one. And she made sure that it encompassed pretty much the range of her interests up until that time. So this was from 1970. So the previous ones you saw last time. A couple on their lawn in Westchester. This Brooklyn family. And this young man in a parade during the time of the Vietnam War. This one she had done originally as part of a commissioned piece for Esquire magazine. The topic is, I think, from my point of view right now, seems kind of gloomy. It's about people's last days. And it was about, these are the king and queen of a dance at a senior citizens center. In her late works, you see how she's not only in this format and this well, sort of the selection in what she does, but in her using a very strong directed flash. So you get this strong shadow behind it that she's infusing with a kind of a more visual drama, although the figures are quite still. And what that flash does, which of course has its effect, is that you see it reflected in their glasses. So his eyes, as he looks directly toward the camera with this utterly set face, are visible, and hers aren't. It's as if she's slightly looking up to look into the camera. But it's so much about costume, dressed up, pretense, king and queen, yes. Well, they're dressed in fake ermine robes, and with this, I'm sure that must be really cheap, sleazy, sort of synthetic taffetas in here, but it has a wonderful sheen. And then to add to this sort of the glamour of it, her dress has the leopard print. So that also is sort of like the furs of European 17th century royalty. And he just poses with utmost severity with his scepter there. So it's the discrepancy between people such as we might see anywhere and all the trappings of royalty. And that one we've seen, of course. And this I only flashed on at the end. This one was done at the same year as he did she did the one with the man with the curlers. This is a Mexican dwarf, 1970, and he was a performer in Manhattan. And you see that she's in his bedroom. There's a rumpled bed, and he has covered himself with a towel, which does not look especially clean. And he has a bottle of hooch back here, and he looks extremely relaxed. And look at him. Is he looking, well, with a sort of heavy-lidded eyes? He is to some slight degree looking down at us, which has to be not the way one thinks about looking at dwarves most of the time. They would be small. And he looks perfectly comfortable, doesn't he? Just inviting, relaxed. And for some reason, what struck me most are these toes coming right out at us. Now, that is a way of sort of emphasizing his physical deformity. And I'm going off on a little art historical detour for that. Because when you have a figure whose legs come straight forward toward you, the observer, as in this Renaissance painting of the dead Christ, where the focus was to show the piercings in Jesus's feet and hands, here the artist just had to observe decorum and could not show, as we would actually see it, that the feet are so much reduced in size, because they ought to be, that's closest to us, they ought to be biggest. And when Velázquez did his extraordinarily sympathetic portrayals of court dwarfs, court jesters on the court of Philip in the 17th century, this is the only one he did where the feet just come straight forward toward you. And this man well, he was a significant figure, and he's shown with great gravity. But I would say especially knowledge of this, which is a well-known image, would lie behind her doing it here. But since the legs are primarily covered, what we got is more perhaps the shortness of his arms, but since they're bent, that's a little bit downplayed. And you mainly get the view of his torso.
Short fingers.
So when Susan Sontag says when she photographs dwarfs, she doesn't get beauty or majesty, she just gets dwarfs. How can that be a criticism? Because that's exactly what it is. It's a dwarf. And that's what she's showing. And she's showing the full humanity of a dwarf. And I think probably one of the best known, certainly of that series, and maybe one of the best known of her photographs is this one, which is known as the Jewish giant. And I have a fair amount I want to do with this one. I'll tell you the background of the story. This is someone she followed and knew for some years. This young man named Eddie Carmel, who until his adolescence was an absolutely ordinary boy. And then there was a tumor on his pituitary gland that affected, so his growth just did not stop. Ultimately, it kills him. He just kept growing and growing, and his heart couldn't sustain him. But here he is with his parents in their house, I believe it was in Queens. And she'd been following them for some years. She first met Eddie because he worked on that, I mentioned last time, that Hubert's flea circus and freak show that was down on 42nd in Manhattan. So she'd struck up an acquaintance with him, and she followed him for some years. Then finally, and taking a number of pictures, and I'm going to show you the rest of the pictures. But I want to start with what someone writing about this for a publication by the Museum of Modern Art about women artists took this picture and really took it apart. I mean, just looked at it carefully, like, what information do we get here? Well, it's a modest house. The housewife, although she's wearing a rather worn or grimy house dress here, likes to keep her things neat so that the lampshades are covered by plastic. The curtains have to come from the store. They don't quite make it to the floor, and they're not quite closed. And There's something a little off in the housekeeping because there's no shade over this light here. She looks up with what? Toward her son. And the boy's father, here dressed in his suit, looks toward his son, not so much directly at his face, and seems to be the figure least involved here. But then also look at the way his bent arm and her bent arm, that makes them a unit. And this is seen as if we're telling about the family, and there's more known about this, the family, that they had, they were Jewish emigres from Tel Aviv who'd settled in the New York suburbs, burbs. And they had a very modest lifestyle. But it's as if this is where the affection. And now, here's something that Diane Arbus said about this. So the person looking at it now, seeing this as a bringing out the essential humanity and the warmth in this, as if this were Diane's goal when she did this picture. Here's something that Diane wrote. Do you know how every mother has nightmares when she's pregnant that her baby will be born a monster? I think I got that in the mother's face. That's a fairly cool, dispassionate comment, wouldn't you say? And then here's another one, also from Diane. I know a Jewish giant who lives in Washington Heights or the Bronx with his little parents. He is tragic with a curious, bitter, somewhat stupid wit. The parents are orthodox and repressive and classic and disapprove of his carnival career. They're a truly metaphorical family. When he stands with his arms around each, he looks like he would gladly crush them. They fight terribly in an utterly typical fashion, which seems only exaggerated by their tragedy. Arrogant, anguished, even silly. I think it takes time, it takes me time, even just reading that over again, to look at her attitude. That has a kind of dispassionate quality, a disconnect, which, if I want to be melodramatic about it, as opposed to her disconnection, is that was something that she would allude to throughout her life sometimes, that she felt that somehow there was some part of her that either wasn't there or that she just didn't have access to. And so people wanted, sort of like speculate, which is always dangerous. Maybe that's one thing that drew her to people who were somewhat outsiders, that she had that sense of being outside even within herself. Well, here are some other pictures that she did of Eddie and that she rejected. I don't think she really ever published them. But here's this really quite lovely one where his dad is fixing his tie. Completely different aura, right? From that. And now you see why I made such a big thing about feet too. So here he was down at the circus.
I came in late. Are we looking at Diane Arbus all morning?
No, you will be relieved to know that we won't have too many more.
Oh, but so far it's been Diane, correct?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
Thank you.
So here he is in walking down in downtown, dressed like any other businessman going about his business. And then the last few are from the project that she was doing at the time of her death. That's the photographs haven't all been, I believe, sorted. They're untitled, and so we don't even know which one she would always have picked out for further publication. But these pictures she made in 70, 71, when she came to New Jersey and visited several homes for the developmentally disabled. And she took something like more than 2,000 photographs. And there's a definite motif in them, in that all of them, she shows the people enjoying themselves. So that runs counter to, I mean, this is about that time of Frederick Weissman's movie, The Titicut Follies, about, the horrors of mental institutions and the suffering that people went through. But she shows just unabashed glee, especially when she's doing these of girls with Down syndrome, as this girl playing in the grass. Or 3, this girl's just getting ready to do a somersault. I think you can see how this specialist thinks that's just marvelously funny. And then at Halloween, here they are all dressed up for a Halloween parade. This is the only one that looks quite ominous, as if it were out of a horror movie, but it's another part of a Halloween parade, but with this scudding clouds in the sky. I mean, it just makes it seem more like something out of Bosch, maybe. But so she never shows the institutions in any of these 2,000, I gather, that they're all outdoor shots, and they're all of these young adults and children, older adults, enjoying themselves. And I thought, just to back out of hers, let's just do something funny. This is Anderson Cooper. It was part of an article that she did, for which she was paid to do something. So there's our own media star, Anderson Cooper, as a baby. And this one of 2 women in the automat, this is a kind of a segue into doing Cindy Sherman, because these women are so very much presenting a facade, so carefully made up, and they do so fit into Diane Arbus's interest in couples and groupings. I thought we'd just end with that one. And wouldn't you know, I have a cat coming in now. Okay, so we're now to Cindy Sherman. I will say, though, born in Glen Ridge, her family left New Jersey when she was very young, and she grew up on Long Island. So here she is in recent years. And here, I'm assuming everybody knows a little something about her, but I'm going to tell you more before we move into her photographs, and you're going to get an extremely short course in painting of the second half of the 20th century too. So there she is. This is maybe one of the most famous early images of hers, done by, it's just called Untitled Film Still. So I'll give you some basic life data here, and then I'll give you that short course. She went to SUNY Buffalo. She wasn't even particularly drawn to the arts, but she got involved. I think then she did become an art major, but in the painting class she took, she just got turned off, and too much work. So she took up photography, and there was, I think they had to take a photography course as part of an art major. She didn't do very well in it. but she continued in photography. So she graduated in 76, and 77, she came down to Manhattan. A good friend of hers was a man named Robert Longo, who also became a well-known young art celebrity at the same time she did in Manhattan. They set up a little bit of a gallery, but she just sort of began to move into the art world. Within 5 years, she had a solo show in Rotterdam. And let's see, by 2012, she had a major retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. And she's had them at the Museum of Modern Art in Los Angeles, several, Jeu de Paume. She just instantly became a star. There's the theme in all her work is what you'd say is a theme of postmodernism. It's a theme of how one represents oneself. Where do you get your identity? Is it something that you absorb from the culture around you and then you adopt? How much is anybody authentically oneself? Is there such a thing as authenticity or originality? And this is what was all part of the theme of postmodernist semiotics, philosophical thinking. She will take this and explore it through the various ways she presents herself in all her photographs. She will work, I don't think she develops her, I don't even know if she developed her own black and whites. She must have in the beginning. But I think that's the only part of the process that she relinquishes control. She devises the thought of the image. She is the model in it. She gets the props. She sets up the lighting. She fixes the staging. She takes the photographs. So it's a one-person operation in which she is totally protean, that she never really shows herself. So they're not portraits of her. But I want to, as I say, let's put her and the arc of the sorts and the thoughts behind it in the context of the second half of the 20th century. This is a Helen Frankenthaler from the early 60s. One of those very big, very beautiful washes of color with her signature bleeding of them there. So that was, she's what's, if you have to have labels, she's second generation abstract expressionist artist, where there is the artist revealing himself, herself, whether through just the action of the way it's painting, the choice of color, not through subject matter, but through the process of making the painting. And subsequent to that, in the way things are increasingly going, there's a violent reaction. In the 60s and then into the 70s, the prevailing style of the press and of the museums and of the galleries was pop art. And pop art rejects the individualism, the self-expression, the artistic self-expression in abstract expression in Helen Frankenthaler and all the others, and instead embraces popular culture, kind of a hard-edged style such as you find in the mass media, embracing the mass media, challenging what the idea of originality. And here I'll show you two works by Roy Lichtenstein from the early 60s for that. This one is in the Museum of Modern Art. So not these two by him don't, but sometimes you have the colored dots called Ben-Day dots, which are the color reproduction system used in the magazines, somewhat in newspapers, to control in a colored image. So their technique was reproducing what mass reproduction did. And what's going to matter when we're thinking about Cindy Sherman's art and what ultimately is that what is he's choosing not only is it's a comic, but it's the idea is it's the heroine, the drowning heroine that that a man is going to have to save, or he or she's not going to call on this man to save her. This one too, it was just titled Unhappiness. It's a somewhat smaller painting, but the same idea. And this is not quite 4 feet square. So it's a pin to artificiality, a pin to cheap popular culture, none of the high culture esotericism of abstract expressionism. And from the same early 60s, look at a couple of Andy Warhols with his lithography and these images of Marilyn Monroe. He too is apparently without irony, with real gusto, consuming the media. The most popular artist of, well, slightly before his time mainly, but these Marilyn Monroe, he did about 20 silk screens of her in the year she died, but they're all based on one film still from a movie from early 1950s. So it's a very, it's nothing contemporary, but it's a commentary in it, isn't it? Like the person loses who they are. There are slight variations in the way you see he's colored each one of these. But it's that same face, that same smile coming at you again and again and again and again. And you get the suggestion as you move into this one, as they become more blurred, until she loses all personality and, in fact, her life just fading away over here. But so he's using lithography, just like you would with the printing press, silk screen using the printing press, and a woman who's been totally turned into an object. And the same thing was being done to art. He did a whole series on The Last Supper, and here, of course, on the Mona Lisa, where it's as if he's doing a test proofs of different colored silk screens of the image, and then it's repeated here again and again and again at different scales. So are you going to say that he's deploring the fact that now these are just familiar images, that the original is disappeared behind its fame? Possibly, maybe not. Let's commentators think about that. Okay, so that was the prevailing style just before Cindy Sherman is going to move out into the art world. And there's something else going on in the 70s that was of great importance. And well, 70s is the age of when, look, disruption in everything, right? Protests everywhere, riots, racial riots, radical feminism. And there was a lot of radical feminist art. This is of another photographer. She died relatively young, American photographer named Hannah Wilker, W-I-L-K-E. And she did a series called, let's see, make sure I call it the SOS Starification Objects series, in which she decided what would be photographed, and she chose the poses, but she did have someone else photograph her. And what she's doing is making fun of glamour photography, whereas you see Lichtenstein and Warhol embracing it. And what you see on her face here is chewing gum, which she'll use repeatedly. And she makes it into the shape of a vagina. what she's saying, you know, you talk about penis envy in art. It says, well, this is Venus envy. And this is what the way men see women. And starification, of course, that's a little like scarification, but it's also like making a woman not into a real woman, but just a star, a starlet. Here's another one. So what makes this feminist is that, you know, is that she's decided on the subject, and she's the one who poses, and she's choosing to be the object. So she's taken over what otherwise the men would do, which is to make the women into objects. So it was really polemical, and there was a lot of polemical art, and there was a lot of 70s art that's also performance art, where the artists were using their bodies. Some of you might remember Chris Burton. He had someone actually shoot him on stage. And there was a painter who would, instead of using paintbrushes, dip female models in blue paint and drag them across a canvas on the ground. So it's just pushing the boundaries of what art was, with the same kind of vehemence that there was in every other area of protest at the time. Oh, this is by someone else. This is actually a woman in Poland, but she's like going after the thought that now women have to be, this is a little bit like a Mona Lisa, but also that you suppress the fact that women that age, they have to be beautiful and young. Oh, I think we'll just do without him. And then we come to Cindy Sherman. There's a title, a label given to a group of artists to which she belongs. They're just called Pictures artists. And it's because there was a show in Manhattan called Pictures, and they were sort of involved in it. But these are artists who are completely immersed in mass media, whether it's advertising, movies, television. They're saying that that's where people are getting their sense of what reality is. I mean, all of this is just too unbearably to be comfortable right now, I think. But so she's a clever woman. She never, ever says what her purpose is in any of her images, nor does she give them ever a title. They're just called untitled. So it's up to us with what we bring, what we know from mass culture, how we've been acculturated, to project an interpretation on them. So as I say, what she would do is that she would put together a costume or a kind of a disguise. And in the early ones, she would be in some setting, and she'd sort of quickly slip into disguise, and then she had the camera set up and she'd take a photo of herself. Now I'm going to show you the first 15 in sequence in just a moment, but this is one of the really very familiar ones. Tell you what to watch for, or you're going to recognize it anyway when you see it. She never looks out at us. She always looks at something somewhere else. And there's a sense of there being part of a drama. One of the qualities that's often mentioned, and why they give them the title, Untitled Film Stills, is they look like it's some kind of cheesy, cheap photographs from B movies that were shopped around to get advertiser for the starlets or the stars or for the movies. But in none of them is there a reference to a specific source or a specific star. They only get their meaning from our general familiarity with things like this. Whereas that Roy Lichtenstein, he actually used a specific DC comic as the source for his. So this was the first in a series of these Untitled. These are 1977. So you have to decide what she's doing. And this is not a bad reproduction. This is intentionally a very grainy, inexpensive looking photograph. The next one. So now she's the sexy young woman who could be advertising something. The Alluring Housewife, I guess. In several of them, it'll be clearer almost there than it is here, but I'll just mention now, she also would put clues in about how artificial the image is. As in this case, here you have this sporadically lit hallway, but then somewhere, where all of a sudden do you get this strong spotlight? So you know, she set up her lights and camera over here. So it's very clear. I mean, evident. In fact, she has two lights, as you can see from looking at her legs there. Or, as I say, these are one after the other. And this one. That's certainly a trope a lot. You get a letter, I think even Vermeer's you're doing that. You get the letter with a message, and so there's some drama present there. Frequently, she'll use very odd angles and cropped views, not what ordinary film still would do. Because look how much of the space is given over to nothingness over here. If this were your starlet that you were trying to promote. Here she is, most seductive as she lies on the bed and daydreams. And then, look, let's see if I can get see this? That's the cord to the camera. Here she has a martini in her hand. Another wig, different wig. Some of these, they look like she did them down at the shore. So there's something going on outside what we can see. But whether it's the idea of how you're supposed to sit in the lounge chair, what kind of bathing suit you're supposed to wear, what size sunglasses you should have, what you drink, those are all determined by the society, and you subscribe to them. Why the drama? Scowling at whatever, not just at the annoyance of having dropped your bag of groceries. And look over here. There's the cord. She even has a clicker in her hand in this one. Then look at this room, and the pillow is going to appear in the next one as well. So she just would go around to, as they say, to Salvation Army. Oh, she loved, she said, actually, in these pictures, let me find this, she said, I don't think of what I was doing as political. To me, it was a way to make the best out of what I like doing privately, which is to dress up. I wish I could treat every day as Halloween and get dressed up and go out into the world as some eccentric character. Okay, so that's what she said. You have to decide for yourself if that's another role playing in which she says that, and is this all critics, gallery owners, museum people, observers who are piling on these other layers of meaning on this, and she's just the innocent doing what she wants? It's hard to believe, isn't it? I think that's another guise that she takes. You know, Picasso is the person who never would tell anything about what his art meant, because it's all there in his painting. It's the same thing true with when Diane Arbus writes something about Eddie Carmel. Maybe that's what she thought at the moment. Is that what she thought when she was taking the picture? How can we know? Now she's the diligent student, the young ingenue. And that is the one done immediately after that one. Extremely dramatic now. Here she is, some well-worn hallway, which itself has suffered abuse. And there she is, backed in the corner as if she too were avoiding abuse. Then you get a very glamorous shot. Beautiful blacks. Doesn't this look like something like an Italian art house film? So then around 80, she seems to have explored that direction as much as she wanted. And then she changes, first of all, she begins to work with color film. And you notice this one, which is from 1981, I think, she presents herself as a kind of more androgynous figure. That darkness before, you see she was already beginning to sort of think just in terms of visually the look of the image could change. And then, although she continues, they're always just called, as they say, untitled film still, or untitled, not always film still, just always untitled. She did name series, and she would sort of take a theme and work primarily in that theme for a while and then move on to another theme. And in 1981, she did this series, not a very big series, called Centerfolds for Art Forum, that magazine that was the first to publish Diane Arbus's work, just about a decade earlier than this. The photos are all about 2 by 4 feet, which was for that time evidently just enormous. The Art Forum, although they commissioned them, they were never published because the man who then came in as editor thought that the public might, the readership might misinterpret what these were. But Cindy wrote about them, or talked maybe. I want to fill the centerfold format, and the reclining figure allows you to do that. You see, she's not talking about this as being like pick-up images. She's doing it as if like, well, artistically, I want to try a slightly different shape. But then she said, and I also want to make the viewer uncomfortable upon realizing they're apparently interrupting a private moment. Because of course, most girly magazines, centerfolds, that's the figures there for you to be looking at. And these women are all involved in some other thing. It's not a very big series. I think later on anyway, she gets to doing like about 6 of a photograph, an edition of 6, and then she'll move on to something else. And she signs and dates them and says, you've got 1 of 6 or 2 of 6, 3 of 6, just as you would if you had an etching or an engraving. The more schoolgirl image. I think I actually had kitchen curtains out of that material that skirt's made out of. So these are the 3 I brought in. Then in 83, she did this really quite interesting one called Untitled, but Artist in Her Studio. Well, of course, this is Cindy Sherman. All of them are Cindy Sherman, but she's not showing herself. She's wearing one wig. She has one wig discarded over here. That may be her studio and her props, but then she also is dealing with some of the cliches of the artist. This is an ashtray full of cigarette butts, and she's got her glass of wine here. So slightly dissolute lifestyle. Not her. And she moved into several series that, I'm not going to show you much at all. Several I won't show you at all. But she, in the mid-'80s, she did one called, it's either grotesques or disasters and fairy tales. And the thing to keep in mind, evidently, is that this is the height of the AIDS crisis, where the manifestations of physical suffering were just everywhere you looked. So she does these, and they're very dark, and she begins to move away from such a concentration on herself. They're more obviously staged scenes now, almost like that artist in her studio was saying goodbye to something. This is one, and then there's another. She'll begin to use body parts, prosthetic body parts strewn around, artificial vomit, broken objects. Sometimes you might find a figure actually just the head and neck from a mannequin, although here you see it is herself. The reason for putting disasters with fairy tales is she said, well, fairy tales all at core have something that's really traumatized thing in them. And these are getting very big too. She was reportedly trying to find something that wouldn't sell, but has never been able to achieve that. This is a really awful one. And is that you? Is that me looking down into the scene in the open compact here? Then she did a series that's called the Sex Series, where she uses mainly mannequins, and she so thoroughly abuses them that they're upsetting to look at, and I would never put them where they would be reproduced in any
Excuse
other
me,
way.
Maggie.
Yeah.
In this picture, do you see the nose and the mouth? It's a body buried under the sand there.
You see, I
Yeah.
think those, I don't know that those are hers or not. I think possibly that's more prosthetic stuff.
Huh.
This is more likely her eyes, her face. Right there. Oh, why don't I go back here? Is that one of those points I should have made? I didn't make before. So she doesn't talk about herself as being a feminist. But you see, even compared to the Hannah Wilker, who set herself up and then would have a man, come in and photograph her. Here, Cindy Sherman takes control of the whole thing. If she's shown as a sexual object, it's because she's set herself up as a sexual object. If she shows herself as grotesque, it's because she made herself as grotesque. And she said, no, I just like to put on costumes. I'm also omitting a whole series she did on clowns, and moving on to one quite a bit later. These are called history portraits from the late 80s. And you see how large her paintings are. Well, this one is not by her, but you can see these others are hers. Where what she does is the same take as in those first Untitled film stills. They look as if she has done a kind of a photographic remake of famous Renaissance or Baroque paintings, but they're elusive. They're very seldom can you say, yeah, this is this particular painting or this particular reference. Because like, oh, this is a little bit of Botticelli. It's a little bit of a 17th century painting. This is Judith and Holofernes, the Old Testament heroine who cut off the head of Holofernes. Look, she's using prosthetic feet. Look how big those feet are. And for these satins, she used the cheapest, sleaziest cloth she can get. Someone talked about all these as being, it's like she called the prop store or the joke store has come to the museum. Just like a Raphael. Now, she was in Rome when she was doing these paintings, and she never went to the museum to see any paintings of the sort. She said, I wanted to work out of books with reproductions. It's an aspect of photography I appreciate conceptually, the idea that images can be reproduced and seen anywhere by anyone. Now, for me, the art historian who grew up with a professor who even would say, oh, all things should be only shown in black and white so you don't get the wrong idea of color. I mean, it's just railed against reproduction. Here, this is a woman who lives in the age of pictures. Pictures are what carry whatever there is to be carried. Hope you can, she's even reproduced reuse this piece of cloth and this very interesting nipple high up on her chest. You need to go to the Met, go to the early Renaissance religious paintings, and you will see that this was the strategy used by many painters to so that Mary doesn't look like just an ordinary mother nursing a child, but to place a breast very high on the side like this. I guess those are little tiny feet. Those are hands, right? And more hands. Something a little strange. And here's one that is based on a painting here. Her version of a Caravaggio's so-called sick Bacchus. And here's the bad reproduction, but of the painting, 17th century painting. So that's quite a considerable verisimilitude there. Is this a Northern European portrait of a merchant? This is based on a theme of one at the Met. And then she'll move, this is done a little later. I'll just go a couple of, this one was in the, up here at the Montclair Art Museum for a show a couple of years ago. A series called Headshots. And the conceit here is that these are photographs taken by people who want to break into the movie business. And so these are their headshots that they're shopping around trying to get any, any invitation to come back to the studio. And they'll often expose the kind of artificiality, both in the makeup, as you can see here, as too much white under the eye and over the eye, or the sheer discomfort of the way she clutches herself and wears a blouse that's too big. And the discomfort in her gaze, her smile. Or this one. I just need to tell you about this one. This was sold in May 2018. It was, the estimate for the sale was, now there's 6 of these. For this one, was estimated it would sell between $30,000 and $40,000. And it actually sold for $63,750. So she's lionized by the culture that she enjoys and that she also looks at very critically. That's another one in this headshot series. And then she moved into, a few years later, this series called Society Portraits. I hope some of you saw these at the Modern, where she, now older woman herself, is using herself as the model. And she's, the themes seem to be aging beauty, women trying to disguise their aging, women who wish they had power, as the wealthy socialites did. And the figures are posed against photographs of settings. The settings are real places, but the discontinuity between the sharp focus there and this backdrop is another part of the intentional artificiality. So that socialite, or this figure now in the, see, she's as if up in the cloisters. Now, I don't know enough about Botox. I can only repeat here what I read, is that sometimes she will add in the makeup something, so it looks as if she has Botox that's being ineffective. It's too visible on them. And in this one, I think, can you see, there's the line. These are big, so you could see all of this in the actuality more clearly. Here would be the line of her actual eyebrow. Then these great painted eyebrows up above. Same here. This is taken at the National Arts Club down by Gramercy Park. Is she making fun of the kind of patron who buys her art? Is she seeing herself in that? Is she seeing all of us in that? In our ways of seeing ourselves only through different disguises? Then the series that she did just 2 years ago, they're men. They're rather androgynous looking figures anyway. So you see how she is following the themes current in society. So now it's about the role of gender, your identification, gender identification. She does these men against settings that are highly manipulated when you look at them. And as you can see, this is a flipped over here, but they're based on photographs she took. So she's using digital photography. She started using digital photography in about 2007, I guess. I didn't know this, I had to check this out myself. The clothing is all recognizable. These are menswear from Stella McCartney's collections. And these figures are all kind of detached, aloof. Then I'm going to show just one more. She now is on Instagram. She's got hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. And she's opened up her account so that it's available to the public. And see, these are some of the distortions she puts on there. I think she puts something almost daily. I mean, I don't use Instagram, so I'm just telling you that. But the interesting feature of this is that now what has she done? She's done something where there's no merchant gets in the way. No gallery owner, no museum can determine where these are seen, how they're seen. Remember that was that big issue in photography? You know, they're completely just divorced from any kind of context. They're not for sale. They're not for resale. So nobody's making money out of this. So she's still, in her way, challenging everything in the system. And if you've stayed this long, I thank you, because we're well over time. But again, if you have questions, I love that. I'll stop this share. Does anybody still around here with a question?
So the only things she did of not her that weren't herself were at the end, right? When she had the men.
No, but no, that she's still posed in that. That's her.
Oh, that's her? So,
that's why they have that kind of ambiguity in them. Yeah.
so she never did anyone
Never.
else?
Never.
Weird.
Because she never did anybody else and she never did herself.
Herself as she really looked. Yeah.
So the very last picture you showed, the top middle one, had all those eyes. What was any
I guess those
reason?
are the kind of filters you can do on Instagram.
Right.
And then of course, doing it on Instagram means anybody can do it. So it's really democratizing it too. Any other?
Yeah, what's the significance of the changes in the wigs?
I don't know that there is any. I think she probably has a huge closet of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, she loves, I mean, you have to believe it that she does love dressing up. And oh, I know the other thing about this is that when she sets it up, I mean, she does these with really intense focus on her own, but she also has to have the right music in the background to set the stage for all of them.
What's her background though, besides
She got a BA.
now?
She got a BA in art at SUNY Buffalo.
But now, her personal history is she? Did she marry? Is she
I
single?
think she was married for maybe about 10 years or so.
Okay.
No, she's just a very wealthy woman now.
Does anybody? I mean, it seems somewhat
And people, I think,
self-obsessed.
don't recognize her when you see her,
yeah.
because she just looks like anyone.
Yeah. Oh goodness. All right. What? Yeah. Sorry. Wait. We're getting a call, but
Can't get it.
yeah. The Maggie, does anybody criticize her self-obsession?
But you see, the thing is, she is not self-obsessed. She's not plumbing herself at all. This is all a commentary on society. There is this kind of like critical, ironic distance in all of them.
You know, it's a fair
She's
comment.
never trying to show herself.
It's a fair comment to say, for example, that Diane Arbus, her photographs are disturbing. Clearly, I think that was her intent. But with Cindy Sherman, I don't know what response. For me, it was, I didn't really enjoy it much. I mean, is that a legitimate point in a
Absolutely.
discussion like this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did not enjoy her work. And whereas Diane Arbus, I can't say I actually enjoyed it. Is it over?
I think.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know if I could say I enjoyed it, but I certainly found it very interesting, and just it evoked a response in me. I was disturbed by it.
See, this is something that's very much, this is the postmodernist critical distance thing going on with Cindy Sherman, where you stand back and say, these are all systems. None of these are actuality.
Maggie,
What is actuality?
Well,
Maggie,
Yeah?
I
Is that
have
Doris? Yeah.
I have something that the Arbus picture made me think about, which was, it's wildly related, that when you're showing the people that were mentally challenged,
Mm-hmm.
my uncle was a pharmacist at Willowbrook State School,
Mm-hmm.
child, and every time we went there, I had nightmares afterwards because there was so much screaming of patients, and so showing those people so happy, just it was such a contrast.
Mm-hmm. I think in a way she always did what wasn't expected of her, Diane.
Well, I think at least her pictures had something to say. It had some kind of story behind it. But this last person you showed, it just didn't turn me on either, like, Mr. Schwartz over there.
I was getting bored with her. I'm sorry to say.
I wasn't bored so much. I mean, I found it very inventive. But now if you go on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see a lot of people who, I don't know if they're imitating her or they're doing their own thing, but they're also, I've seen a lot of people imitate recognized art, oil paintings from
Right. Oh, yeah.
earlier,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they copy it and they make themselves up to look like that.
I think she
painting.
was very early at it, but now, because actually that, you know, that when she was doing it, there wasn't such a thing as some of these digital media, mass media things.
Right. Now it seems, now what she's
Now it's a
doing,
thing. Now it's
it's,
a thing.
yeah, right. It's not
Commonplace.
so, it's pretty
It's like the world
commonplace.
has caught up with her.
Yeah, they caught up with her and now they're doing,
Yeah.
they're all being Cindy Sherman.
Yeah.
They're doing the same. I'm interested to know where she goes from here, because it's probably more challenging now since the media is open to everyone.
Mhm. And that she's willingly going into that. I mean, you can imagine how many gallery owners are just not very happy with her because they can be making money off her big pictures.
You're right.
I'm wondering who determines what's art, since I don't consider this art. And I'm wondering also whether the concept of the psychology behind her work or the work itself is what is so revered.
You know, Roz, I can't give you an answer for either one of those because I'm so aware that the answers that anybody could give would change from probably decade to decade. As I said, you know, a long time ago, well, before the 18th century, there wasn't even an idea that there was such a thing as art with a capital letter. But art had some other, the images had some other function. And certainly we know that what is considered good art, think how in your own life, things that you liked at one time you don't like now. And you can pretty much assume that things will, partly because of the world around us and because of our own experiences, what we like 10 years from now is different from what we like now. So it's really fluid.
Mm.
What do you think of, I forget the acronym now, the for the art that you buy, but
Oh, I can't remember. I don't either. It's like, oh, geez.
IMF or something, I
Yeah.
don't remember what it's called,
Yeah.
but where you buy something for hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
you own it, but nobody, you can't see it, or it's
Yeah,
just,
it's online. Yeah.
it's meta. You know, it's
Mhm.
Fries my brain anyway.
yeah, me too, me too.
Is anybody disturbed by, I was kind of bothered by like Warhol's manipulation of the Leonardo Mona Lisa. And to take somebody else's art, take a picture of it and juxtapose it in different positions and different development. It's almost like you're taking the choices that another artist made, a great artwork, those choices, and then manipulating them. It's almost, I don't know what the word is.
Absolutely. And now you go, you know, you go to the Louvre and see it, and nobody's looking at the painting. They just have a camera up above taking a picture to see over the crowds. Yeah. No, but he's really making a, especially starting in about the age of pop art. It was. So what's this big deal about originality? Why do we worship originality?
But some of it's sensational, don't you think? I mean, what is it? Damien Hirst is the one who does the.
Yeah.
Maggie, were all the Cindy Sherman photographs, because some of them look like the faces were so artificial that they look like maybe they were painted rather than photographs.
No, but that was artificiality that she wanted, because she wants her works to look like artifice. I mean, it's layer on layer of artifice in those things. It doesn't look like Cindy Sherman. It doesn't look like anybody else. It looks like somebody trying to look like somebody else.
Some of it actually didn't even look like photographs. They almost look like paintings.
Paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, next week then we will go to the purity and integrity of thought and earnest purpose when we get to Maya Lin. Anybody else?
No, it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye.
Fungible tokens. Yes, thank you.
Oh, fun. Yes.
What did you say next week was again?
Maya Lin.
Oh, the architect.
Yeah.
Thank you.